topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good evening, listeners. My favorite time of the week. I am so thrilled to be here with you. And thank you to those who have got their copy of Expert to Influencer. And for those who have not, you will be seeing the link as we continue the show. Do get your copy because the profits from the book, part of the profits of the book are going to entrepreneurs impacted by pandemic or who are recovering from crisis. So folks, thank you for your generosity, and we continue to hope that you do so. And one more thing that I'd love to ask of you is that find that 1 hour of that time in 1 month, not asking for more, just 1 hour per month, and give it back with no strings attached to anyone that you want. Now, that can be in form of a smile, that can be in the form of a wave, just helping a neighbor out, or doing something, whether it's for your loved one or for your neighbor or for anyone. It could be a colleague, it could be a boss, it could be a spouse, could be your children, anyone, folks. Just do that, because think about it, even if 100 million people did that every month, just in the US alone, we would be talking about 100 million hours of kindness. So take that and run with it. So today we have a special guest for you, Melanie Lentz. Welcome, Melanie.
Hello. Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to see you.
Yes, definitely. A pleasure to have you. So folks, Melanie is a former Secret Service agent, and she learned to protect herself as she protected others. So Melanie, let's go back to, we are going to do a little bit of rewind or take you back in time. Let's say when you were a child, were you always interested in like playing any spy games or spy boards or visiting spy museums?
No, actually, I was a little girl who had no idea really what she wanted to be when she grew up. I did grow up reading every single Nancy Drew mystery story. So maybe there was a subtle underlying interest, but nothing I really took seriously. I started college as a music major of all things, and then switched to exercise science. So a little lost, you could say, trying to figure things out. It was during grad school. I went to get my master's in kinesiology or exercise science. And my grandpa, of all people, is the one that put the bug in my ear. He said one of his buddy's daughters was an agent. And so he would say, you know, hey, she had all these crazy fun adventures. You could do this job. You were a good student, an athlete. Why don't you apply? And I don't think if he would have mentioned it, I would have done the research to even think I could do the job at all.
That's interesting, music. So from your childhood, do you recall any moment that left a mark on you?
Oh, from childhood. I think I learned from my parents the art of kindness. And I think that the way that they lived was a way that was meaningful to others. They lived to serve other people. And I think sometimes as I look back, sometimes that maybe influenced my career choice, where I wanted to do something super meaningful with my life, something that benefited others just as much as, you know, a paycheck benefited me every 2 weeks, But so I didn't want to do something that I wanted to be fulfilled and validated in my job. And that's probably a normal feeling, not unique to me. And so I found that validation and meaning in my life in the Secret Service, and I loved it and I ran with it.
So as you grew up, tell me a little bit more about music. What did you play instrument or more than one instrument? And what type of music do you like?
Yes. Well, I grew up, in typical piano lessons. Every Monday afternoon, my mom took my sister and I to piano lessons. And I always loved that. I was more interested in the songwriting end of things. So I guess the writer in me was in there. I had applied to some schools to be a music major. I really wanted to go to Belmont University in Nashville. So I was kind of ready to pursue that music thing. And ended up becoming a music major and got a scholarship for swimming at a school closer to home. And, like many people, I changed my major, but that was something I loved. And I liked all kinds of music. I think today I have kind of an eclectic mix. If somebody looked at my Spotify history, they'd be, who is this? I have no idea what kind of vibes she's into.
Definitely. That is, yeah. No, what you're saying is so true. It's music, and you turned the career. So when you went to college for a music major, then how did the course alter?
Well, the honest answer is I was the only student athlete at the school attempting to be a student athlete and a music major. And when you're a music major, there are, choruses you have to participate in, weekend, concerts, that kind of stuff. And in swimming, you've got meets on the weekends, practice that conflicts. And I made it work the first year. And when it was time to kind of start planning classes for the second year, it just wasn't going to work. I was pretty much told by the school, you need to pick your sport or pick music. And I picked the sport, and mostly because I was at a private school and it would have required a lot more loans. So I took the scholarship and switched my major. Now, I'm happy I did now, looking back. I don't know that I made the choice for the right reasons then, perhaps. But, you live and learn. So I stuck it out with the exercise science.
Well, here's the thing, especially when you are a teenager and when you're in college, that's what it's about.
Exactly.
It's about learning yourself. It's about figuring out what you want in life. And here's what I'll say, that doesn't matter even if you're 70 years old, and if you find that you have a passion and you want to follow it. I mean, unless, of course, if you're looking to be an astronaut, then it's
a little
not
late
doable.
now.
But that said, if you can do it, why not?
Why not? Yeah, exactly.
It's a question to ask ourselves, especially if it's something that anybody wants to pursue. So then what happened after you pursued exercise science?
Well, I graduated from college and decided I kind of liked sciences and still wasn't quite sure what to do with a degree. So I got a job and went back to school at night to get my master's in the same topic. That field of athletics is quite competitive. And so getting the master's is generally a better step in the right direction for a better job. So it was just kind of the next move, I suppose. And it was during that time that my grandpa and I had this conversation, and I researched the Secret Service, and I met the very minimum requirements. You had to be 21 years old with a college degree or equivalent experience, which would be like military or law enforcement. And I had just turned 22 and had just gotten my college degree and was in grad school. And so I met the minimum requirements. And one thing about me is I was quite a stubborn young lady. I was kind of one of those people where if somebody tells me I can't do something, it will be my lot in life to prove them wrong. And that's a good and a bad thing, but in this case, probably a good thing, because I think I had the courage to submit the application and thought, what's the worst they can say? No, maybe I'll never hear from him. I'm no worse, Right, so, right. But they called, and I am a type A along with this stubborn young lady. And by the time I had gotten through the written tests and kind of these initial interviews where they kind of weed out people that aren't serious, I had done my research and realized that this was a job that I needed to prove to them and myself that I could do. And so I thought, how am I going to do that? How am I going to prove that this 22-year-old with no life experience who changed her major, doesn't know what she wants to do? How am I going to prove to tell the Secret Service to hire me? And I decided I was trainable. I was that type A stubborn person, so I wasn't going to quit. and I was willing to do the work to learn. And so my attitude in those interviews was, I will do the research, I will do the extra work. I know I'm behind, but what is the point of 8 months of academy training if you're not going to teach me? I'm not expected to know everything going into it. I'll do the work. Give me a chance. And I think it worked. Well, obviously it worked, because a few months later, they called me and said, Melanie, we have a job in the Los Angeles field office. So they have field offices in the Secret Service all over. And did I want the job? And gulp, of course I want the job. And I left 3 weeks later to start this protection adventure that would ultimately come full circle to where I was going to have to make another big move and quit that job to protect myself. And that's kind of where my whole like growing coming of age period came. Was not that moment I became a Secret Service agent at 22, but 10 years later.
So tell us about the academy. What was your experience like? And during that time, were there many females? Because so many times what happens is that, especially in these areas, and rightfully so, also sometimes, there may be not a lot of women want to go and do that strenuous physical exercise. I mean, I'm just speaking generally. So usually the percentage is lower in these areas. So what was your experience like?
Right. Yes. The Secret Service actually did not hire female agents until the 1970s. And even today, and especially when I was there, the ratio is about 1 female to every 9 or 10 male agents. So definitely a small percentage of agents were female. And so in my academy class, we had 3 females, myself and 2 others, in a class of 24. So still a pretty low amount. Both of them were older than me. Of course, everyone was older than me. They were older than me. One had military and law enforcement experience, and the other one had law enforcement experience. So I went into training very much the outlier, the underdog. And I looked about 16 when I was 22. And no matter how I did my hair or tried to make myself look older, I just stood out just a little bit. So you can imagine I was walking into day 1 of the academy. Of course, I had watched the movies and read the books, but you can't, replace the actual experience. And so I had never stood in formation for the first time. I wasn't in the military or law enforcement, so I didn't know how to do that. I'd never held a pair of handcuffs. I didn't know anything really other than what I could just educate myself quickly in during the application process. And so I found that I was behind a little bit, and that while the other guys, maybe had handcuffed people every day in their law enforcement jobs, I had to practice. And so it kind of felt silly, but after hours, I would just ask my classmates like, hey, can we practice this or whatever after? And I was very lucky in that I think I showed that I was willing to do the work despite being behind in certain skills. And so I had kind of a big band of big brothers and big sisters that helped me catch up. And so I'm very grateful for that, because I know not every female in the job, especially young female, has that experience. But I was one of those people that just hustled until I learned and became proficient. I was better at the physical activity stuff. I was just young. I recovered better from long runs. I was just younger. But some of that other skill related stuff I had to learn from scratch. And so I wish I could say it was fun. Looking back, I have fun memories, but it was not fun from those 8 months. Yeah.
Right. But what stands out for me is that you transferred the skills from your exercise major. Not only that, but you hustled.
Exactly.
And you didn't stop. You said that, okay, it doesn't matter whether you're a type A personality or not. You were like, okay, so what if I'm going to be behind? I can join. And there may be a lot of young girls, and especially like newer generation, you see that more and more doors are being opened for women. And the expectations and everything, there's been a whole turnaround as we speak. Women are breaking frontiers everywhere. So if there were young girls, let's say 19, 20-year-olds who are going through college and who may be thinking of going into Secret Service, what would your advice be to them?
Right. Well, as far as going into the Secret Service, I had to learn a big lesson that was taught to me early on in training. And that was the idea of command presence. That's a phrase that's used often in the academy. When you're protecting somebody, you have to be assertive, confident, stand up and have this command presence is the words they used for me. And I remember I struggled with that. I am very introverted, even though I'm type A and stubborn, but I wasn't as tall, I wasn't as big, I wasn't as experienced as a lot of the people in my class. And so early on in training, the instructors really got on me for not being loud enough, confident, assertive enough. Just go for it. You're protecting somebody's life. Like, you need to find it in there. And we had this test where we were going to be fighting a pretend assassin. And the test was a scenario based. They give you a scenario, like you're going to be taking the president to his motorcade, and you're going to be, there's going to be an attack somewhere in that movement, and you're going to respond. And so that day of that test, the instructors told me, if you don't get it together, you're not going to make it through this academy. Basically that. I was struggling. And I remember one of the instructors standing there with his clipboard and his red pen, and he clicked it open like was going to have a lot to write down. And I remember it just made my blood boil a little bit. And maybe that was the greatest thing that could have happened in that moment. But I thought, I'm going to show you. And that was a big turning point in training. I stood up. I gave it my all. I'd never screamed louder. I'd never fought harder. I'd never been more assertive and confident in my life. And I remember when they called the test, test is over, that the world was kind of spinning and everything came back into focus. And I stood there and realized, oh my gosh, I can do this. And so my advice would be, is that command presence is something crucial. And it's not something you're ever going to find if you're timid and don't just go for it. So I say, if you want to be a Secret Service agent or go into that kind of line of work where you might be a bit of a minority, go for it. What's the worst can happen? You don't make it, but you will have tried. And I guarantee you, if you find that command presence and you just don't quit, you probably do fine.
Yeah, I love what you said. You would have tried it. So then you would not be wondering for the rest of your life, what if
Exactly.
Yep. It's going after your dreams. And here's the thing, so many times fear stops so many people, regardless of gender, and self-doubt, and that inner critic gets in the way of people achieving their dreams. So did you, as you were going through that training in that academy, or even as you were sitting in those interviews, did any of those thoughts occur to you, or were you so focused on the goal that there was no time for those thoughts to creep in?
Oh, the thoughts crept in all the time. It was just me pushing them away. It's natural. I mean, everybody feels that fear when you're doing something scary and crazy, and that unknown is always something that's going to cause a little bit of fear. In my case, it's what was I going to do with it? If I would let the fear make me quit and say, oh no, there's no way. I'm too young. I don't have this. I don't have this experience. I don't have anything to offer. Then you're not going to get anywhere. But in my case, I had to sit there, and it took a while to come up with that I'm trainable line. I had to say, I do have something to offer. I need to find out what it is every bit as much as I need to prove it to them. And so I was scared every day when I put those boots on and we were running and had to fight people and learn how to shoot and protect people and investigate threats. Like, I was scared every day because I thought, I don't have the option to fail if I get this job. If I make it, my job hinges on my ability to do this correctly. And so sometimes the fear can be crippling, but it can also be very motivating as well.
Absolutely. It's about how you use those fears.
Exactly.
Because you said that failure is not an option because somebody's life is dependent in your hands. You're responsible for protecting someone.
Right.
So you mentioned, as you plowed through your academy, and you mentioned that you had to learn to protect yourself. So tell us a bit about those 10 years and then about the event.
Yes. So when I got out of training, this was 2008. So I was assigned to the Los Angeles field office, and 2008 was a presidential campaign year. So that was the Obama-McCain campaign year, which was crazy that year. And I traveled a lot because the Secret Service protects the major candidates and vice presidential candidates. So in addition to the normal protectees, you have extra ones. And so my first year on the job was a lot of on-the-job learning, crash courses in protection, traveling to one rally after another, to one fundraiser after another. And while I learned a lot and realized I loved my job, I created some really bad habits that first year. And those habits were, I said yes to work 100% of the time and no to my family, my loved ones, and my personal life. And you could pretty much fast forward those habits for 10 years until it caught up with me. And So while I excelled at work, I was validated at work. I thought I was doing something good. I had earned a reputation for being a team player and a hard worker. And I just plowed through. I spent about 8 years in the Los Angeles field office, protecting, visiting heads of state. So if a prime minister from another country came to Los Angeles for even just tourist stuff, we always had foreign dignitaries in LA because there's a lot of touristy things to do. So you protected so many people. And you had a big office, and I created some great friends. And so the morale amongst that group of friends was just, like I said, validating. I felt like my life had meaning. I was doing something big at a young age. And sometimes you always want to go where you're validated, where you're appreciated. And I was married at the time. The marriage had a lot of problems that when I minimized and dismissed for years, we both did. And when your job kind of subtly tells you that your life isn't as important as somebody else's because you're protecting them, it makes it easy to dismiss things. And eventually, throughout the career, or throughout a few years, you have to go to DC because in Washington, DC, that's where protection really happens. That's what every Secret Service agent wants to do, right? You want to protect the president and the vice president. You don't want to stay in the field offices for your whole career. You want to go to do protection. And so when it was time for me to go to the president's detail in Washington, D.C., that dream of every agent, my marriage was in trouble. And my husband at the time was a local police officer. And so moving across country would be harder for him because my job was federal and his was local. So we were at a point in our marriage where we were at a crossroads. Some stuff had happened that I wrote about in my book that just kind of forced you to start facing your demons, and myself included. And I own that now.
Right.
And so it was that time where I had to make a career choice that would either ruin my marriage or a different career choice that would save it or potentially save it. And at the time, there was an opening on former First Lady Nancy Reagan's detail. So former First Ladies and former presidents get protection for life. And so she still had a very small protection detail. She was in her 90s, not super active, but that detail was based in Los Angeles. So I could fulfill my protection duties and not have to move. So I thought this was a win-win for everyone. And so I took that position, and the marriage was falling apart, and I was exceptionally angry, exceptionally resentful at my husband, because I made a career choice and it was too late for too late for the marriage. And I wasn't able to go to DC, but I committed kind of career suicide by going to Nancy Reagan's detail because it wasn't a big detail. I probably wouldn't promote out of that detail. But looking back, it was the first time I made a work-related decision for the betterment of my personal life. And so I don't regret that decision, because everyone else at Nancy Reagan's detail at the time had made the decision because of their personal lives. And they had a perspective that was, when you retire from this job, they'll replace you in a hot second, but you'll still have your family. And so when I needed that kind of advice and influence, I was put in that position. And I am eternally grateful for that now. Even though it was too late for the marriage, it was the toughest time of my life being surrounded by some great people with good advice, I guess. Shortly after that, Nancy Reagan passed away. So the hits just kept on coming. I was there less than a year and she passed away. And that is the moment, that event was the catalyst to some really big changes in my life for ultimately the better. So when she passed away, this was 2016, March 2016. So was that about 5 years ago now, a little over 5 years ago now. I got a call that morning saying the Mrs., which is what we called her, the Mrs., had passed away. It was sudden. She was older, but she went downhill very quickly. And they said, she passed away. I'm calling you because you're going to relieve the midnight shift at the funeral home. And I did not wake up that morning thinking that's where I was going to report for work, let me tell you. And I was the only female on the shift that morning. There were only 2 females on the whole detail. So our boss told us that one of us needed to be in the embalming room, which they don't tell you about when you become an agent, that's something you might have to do. And I don't know why I volunteered, because that was not something I wanted to see, but I thought, well, maybe that would be something she would have wanted me to say, as a woman, maybe she would appreciate that. So I was there, and yes, that will make you contemplate your life. But throughout that week, I started thinking about where my life was headed. Where I am clinically depressed, I'm divorced, I have not seen my family in a major holiday. That whole week leading up to her funeral was a lot of self-reflection. And after her funeral, I got transfer orders to go to Washington, D.C., which is what I thought I really wanted, right? I'm getting my dream. I get to go to D.C. I'm starting over. And over the next few months before I had to do that transfer, I realized that I had become somebody I didn't like very much. I excelled at work, worked really hard, was successful at work, and I didn't like who I was outside of work. And, it kind of comes full circle. I'm in college applying to be a Secret Service agent, and almost 10 years later, I was at the Republican National Convention, and I was going to work both conventions, Republican Convention and then leapfrog over to the Democratic Convention that summer of 2016, right before I was supposed to report to Washington, D.C. And they had us housed in dorm rooms at Kent State University because all the hotels were full. So I've kind of chuckled now thinking about it, that I apply in a college setting, and I woke up one morning at Kent State University in that dorm room they had me housed in, and I just knew I have to leave. The job I love, I know if I go to DC, life is just crazy again. And I won't take the time to do what I need to do to protect myself. And that was kind of the first moment where it hit me. You have to start protecting yourself, and you have failed at that. And look what's happened. And so I texted my boss from a dorm room and said, "Boss, I can't report to DC after the 2 conventions. I know that's going to cause some paperwork and some hardships, but when I'm done with this assignment, I need to leave the Secret Service. What do I need to do?" And I thought that would be a scary call, but the moment or scary text, but the moment that conversation was done, I was relieved. And I think that was confirmation. I'm doing the right thing, but I am scared to death. That fear crept back in. I am scared to death. What am I doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's all you have known, like, whole of your life. And now you are just kind of taking a leap of faith and moving on.
Right.
Yeah. It's so you mentioned that you just knew you had to do it. And so would you say that was an emotional decision or based on your gut decision?
Yeah, emotional decision, but it was when you finally trust your intuition. That's something they teach you on protection. Trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, look like right, seem right, it probably isn't right. And I kind of got confirmation that next week when I went in to turn in all of my gear. I kind of had that confirmation. I turned in all my gear, and, for the first time in basically my adult life, I'm walking out of the office without all of that stuff I've been carrying. My credentials, my passes, my ballistic vest, all of that stuff. I don't have it. And I walked out into the elevator landing, and this guy walks into the elevator landing. He has a badge and a gun. I didn't know him, but he says, "Hey, I'm so-and-so. You must be one of the new agents in the office." And it was just like that, like a gut punch. I just got replaced. Somebody else just stepped in to do my job just as good, if not better than I did. And I walked into my car and I just lost it. I just bawled my eyes out. Like, what have I done? What have I done? And I wish I could say it got better right away. And it doesn't, because they say when I was, in therapy and getting, talking to people about the depression and the divorce and stuff, that there are these things called stressors that, can cause some of this stuff. And I made the naive assumption that those elimination of the stressors, a toxic marriage, a job that demanded more of me than I could handle at the time when I was dealing with some stuff, I thought that the removal of those would have been the turning point. I'm a new woman now. It's all gone. Everything gets better. But I was unwilling to do the inner work. And that took a long time to realize that I needed to face some inner stuff. It wasn't anybody else's fault. I played the blame game for a while, and I own that now. Blamed my husband, blamed my job, blamed everyone, but deal with my own stuff. And when I finally did start dealing with it, that's when I realized that the protection part was lacking for me.
Yeah, looking out for yourself, just like you're looking out for so many of the dignitaries. So kind of making a detour here, you worked for Nancy. She's been one of my favorite first ladies, so graceful and all that. Can you share with us if you have any personal stories of her in your experience with her, and what was she like?
Yeah, so she was in her 90s, so we didn't travel or do a lot of events. And by that time, most of the people came to her. So the doctors and people would visit her instead of us going out a lot. So I didn't ever have a personal conversation with her one-on-one. It was always logistics or business, I remember Diane Sawyer came for lunch one time. And so I had to go in and tell, hey, Diane Sawyer's here to have lunch with you, those kind of things. Nothing chit-chatty. And I didn't know her personally. And not many of us do. You don't always have a super personal relationship with the people you protect. But I like to say I kind of got to know her after the fact. So after she passed away, because I was going through a divorce, when she passed away, and they read a love note that Ronald Reagan had written to her on Christmas Day one time. And I learned that day that there was a whole book of these letters. And she had written kind of in the foreword of the book about kind of her marriage advice. And that, I think that learning kind of about her, and a lot of things made sense, how she acted, to us, and sometimes made sense after the fact, that I get her a little more than I did back when I was seeing her in person. I understand a little bit more now, not having been there for very long. I was only there less than a year, so I didn't get to know her that much. But I remember some of the nuggets of wisdom she had about her marriage were things that I needed to hear, that kind of helped me start to process where maybe I had gone wrong in my own. And so, yeah, I remember there was one time we took her to a Christmas party, one little story, and her limo was a minivan at the time. We called it the limo, but she was in a wheelchair at the time. And so I was driving the minivan, and we went up to a party at one of her neighbors for Christmas, and she had on this super nice outfit. And one of the agents said, Mrs. Reagan, you look so lovely today. And it was her favorite agent. She totally had favorites. And she was like, oh, this old thing, I just threw this together. Thanks. So she was like in such a good mood. And that was just a couple months before she passed away, that Christmas party. So that's kind of my silly memory of her getting in that limo dressed to the nines and us driving her to the Christmas party. And when they wheeled her out, she looked over at me and kind of winked and said, well, bye, stuff like that. So she was so funny. That night, I remember that's kind of my happiest memory of her just being in a happy mood for Christmas that year.
Absolutely. So you decided to move out. And so many times what happens is that as you embark on new journey in your life, you still bring the lessons from the old or from the past.
Right.
So what would you say were the lessons that you took, and share that with us?
Sure. Well, I have kind of three main life lessons I take away today with the Secret Service. And my day-to-day life today kind of revolves around remembering those lessons. And they're not a, one-size-fits-all kind of lesson book, but they're things I think that can help others, and as much as they've helped me. The first thing I learned was from Nancy Reagan, of all people, and that was the concept of legacy. And not just so much, what are people going to say about me when I'm gone, but more, what are people saying about me today? How do I want people to see me today? And what do I want them to say after they meet me for the first time or work with me, etc.? And that's one thing, is I didn't know what that legacy was. I didn't know what kind of person I wanted to be. And Nancy Reagan's legacy of love that everybody talked about, how fierce she was and how protective of her husband, that kind of legacy of love kind of prompted me to say, well, my legacy is someone who is divorced, angry, bitter, clinically depressed, and handling it all poorly. That is not what I want to be. This is not who I want to be. And so kind of the first lesson I learned is that I do not have to have everything figured out. I don't have to know where my career is going to go, but I can know today what kind of person I want to be. And once I figured out this is the kind of person I want to be still continue to live a meaningful life that helps others. But once I identify that, I realize that is what I want to protect. That is worth protecting. And it's easy to lose sight of that when life gets chaotic. And so the first lesson is to know your legacy and make a decision to protect it. And that was the turning point in my life for learning the other lessons. So the second lesson is the idea of situation reports. That's kind of a military term, but it's basically a status update that the motorcades and the destination agents are communicating. And, if a demonstration pops up or there's something that needs to be communicated, you have to communicate it quickly and accurately, or problems could happen. You can't protect anybody efficiently if you're not swift and prompt. And for me, situation reports involve an honest answer to the question, how are you doing? And that's to myself as well as when other people ask me. And I find that for me, it's easy to be just fine. And I know I am not the only person who has that as a default answer when people say, "How are you doing?" I'm fine, always fine, because there's always something else more pressing to dominate my attention than dealing with whatever demons I need to face in my life. And so I had to learn that when I'm giving dishonest situation reports to myself, it usually means that I've lost track of something and lost track of that legacy I want to leave. And so know your legacy, choose to protect it, give yourself honest situation reports. And if you're not all clear in your situation report, then you need to do something about it. And for me, that was a mental health thing. I was suffering from depression that I now know, after communicating it, that this runs in my family. And I didn't know that ahead of time. And so I kind of, you open up these conversations that should have happened a long time ago. But it's something that I say, my legacy isn't affected by my depression. I thrive despite it, and I deal with it. And it's something I am not unique in dealing with. It's just something that I choose. That doesn't identify me. That is not my legacy.
Right.
And the third thing, which I think is one of the more important aspects of protection, if not the most important aspect of protection, is the idea of access control. As an agent, protection is all about access control. You can't just throw the president in a concrete bunker and put a hologram on a stage when he needs to be in public. You can't do that. So, and the same goes for, my personal life. I can't withdraw and never expose myself to anybody and expect to be a healthy human being. And as a Secret Service agent, you kind of have this delicate balance when you're protecting someone of determining who needs access granted, whose access should be denied, who maybe needs limited access, and who maybe has done something where their access should be revoked. And so you grant access to, say, you're doing a fundraiser and the hosts need access to your protectee. You might deny access to someone who's made a threat to the protectee, so they're going to be on a do not admit list. And then you might need to limit access. Maybe somebody's going to put the mic on the president for the interview, but they don't need to be there all the time. And then if you do something stupid or say something, threatening during the event, then your access is going to get revoked. It's always this delicate, fluid movement. It's always changing, and you have to figure out that balance. And that concept that I loved about protection was finding the security plan, implementing it, is exactly what I needed to do in my personal life. So I take kind of that whole process and looked at my own life and said, okay, access control. Who and what controls my everyday actions, thoughts about myself and others? Who controls me on a daily basis? What is it? And when you actually take the time to write that stuff down, it's very humbling and enlightening. And I realized I had let my job determine my worth, my self-worth. I had let depression identify me. I let depression tell me who I was. And I just let other things, toxic things, have access when I should have been revoking access to some other things. And so that access control is something I still struggle with. And I imagine everyone struggles with it. It's very difficult to make big changes in access control, like quitting the job and that kind of stuff. But I found that when my access control is off, my situation report is very off. And almost 100% of the time, I've lost track in some way of the kind of person I want to be. I let other things cloud that journey for myself. And so today, I'm always saying access control. What needs to change? It's an ever changing and ever consuming kind of thing for me. But I realized one important thing that I think helps me as a woman today, being my own boss, not working for someone and branching out and starting over, writing books, speaking and doing all that kind of stuff, is that when I revoke access to the negative things, it's not a loss. It's not a loss. And when I started thinking it does hurt. There is loss involved, and it hurts to lose things that are so familiar, like a job or a spouse. But at the end of the day, when the toxic parts are removed or revoked, I made a lot of room for a lot of positive access. So, my job was gone. It was something that needed to change, but I was able to see my family. I had to rebuild some relationships that had been neglected for a long time. And that was positive access I'd rejected, but had to be open to grow. I was able to have different job opportunities and different, writing and speaking opportunities that I would never have had otherwise if I hadn't have made room for the positive stuff that is still validating, still meaningful, and allows me to remember who I want to be, and that my daily life furthers that that goal to be the kind of person I want to be. And so that's kind of how I take all of that away from the Secret Service, and with a huge thank you. Yes, there were so many challenges with being in that line of work, but I walked away at 22 years old. For 10 years, I had this experience that taught me to become a much better woman today. And I'm proud of that person I'm becoming. Still a work in progress, let me tell you. But I'm going in a more positive direction than I ever was as an agent, for sure.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'm sure that your family is really proud of you, how you have cruised through life, going after your dream, and then realizing that it was not for you. And that's one of the things that's so important to know, that just because you have changed your mind does not mean that dream did not have value. That does not mean that you made the wrong decision. It's knowing that you are a living, breathing being, and things change. So, Melanie, thank you for all the nuggets. If people were to reach out to you, where could they reach you?
Yeah, my website is melanielentz.com. So my first and last name. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram and all that good stuff that you can find me at Melanie Lentz. And I have 2 books. So Agent Innocent, there's the one over my shoulder here. That's the memoir, kind of with a lot of the funny stories and the comedy, but also the life lessons we talked about today. And that's Agent Innocent. You could find that on Amazon. There's Kindle, audiobook, paperback, all that good stuff. And then I have another book that just came out in May called Advanced Work, a Personal Protection Assignment. And that's a little workbook for a 7-day workbook, kind of more geared towards the younger ladies who are maybe in college, high school, that are trying to learn how to protect themselves. Kind of the stuff I wish I knew before I started adulting. And so that's how you can reach me. And I like to say it is really never too late to start protecting yourself. So it doesn't matter what age you are, you could still benefit from creating your own security plan. And I started over in my 30s, starting to protect myself. And I realize now I wasn't stuck. I wasn't stuck in that job. I wasn't stuck at life. And it wasn't too late to start practicing good access control and all that good stuff. So I hope that your listeners benefit from that. I'd love hearing from you. So let me know what you think. And there's more lessons to add on to all of this, of course. So,
Mel, we got some nice comment here from Sherry. And she said, so inspiring. I'm happy for you.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us, Melanie, and listeners. Thank you, because without you, the show would not be possible. And of course, Rebel for making the show possible. And until next time, folks, take care and be well.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week, Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time.